sometimes it's very difficult to preach in this parish. Just as a preface, I'm being taped so my fellow deacons can critique my homilies. I feel like a little like a zebra wandering into a lion's den.
And I have to tell you that I told him before Mass that I get one photo bomb. I'm not going to tell him when.
So if you're looking for some entertainment, come to the Deacons Continuing Ed Day next week. Speaking of weird things, one of my favorite ways to pray is to imagine myself in the gospel story as one of the characters. And it's usually very fruitful, but sometimes just my own head gets in the way, and I think to myself, what if I was Philip in this gospel story? And these Greek people came up to Philip and said, we want to see Jesus. And Philip goes to Jesus, and Jesus goes on this long thing about a grain of wheat. And I pictured myself as Philip saying, yeah, but do you want to see the Greek guys or the Philippines? But it is an important piece of the story. The Greeks, long before Jesus was born, had a man named Socrates who lived among them. He was one of the great philosophers. We still today consider him one of the great philosophers. But he challenged their culture, much like Jesus challenged the culture of his people. And in the end, they told Socrates, you can recant what you said, or you can go into exile, or you will be killed. And Socrates says, I am not recanting what I said. And I refuse to go into exile like a criminal. If you want to kill me, you can. And through the generations, the Greek people repented of that and became firmly committed to people being able to say and believe what they wanted. The fathers of democracy, we often call them. So it is likely that these Greeks came to Jesus and warned him what was coming. That the elders of the church were ready to crucify him. And Jesus' response to that is what follows. Most of us, I would say, and I would include myself in this, look at death like an interruption in our life's mission. Like the end. There was a movie a few years ago called The Bucket List. Anyone remember seeing that? All the things these guys wanted to accomplish before they died. But Jesus didn't see his life and death that way. It is very clear from what Jesus said that death was part of the mission. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. Jesus said, now the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is for this reason that I have come for this hour. John was writing probably about 70 to 100 years after the events of Jesus' death and resurrection. And John's community probably was being persecuted. Many of them had probably given their lives. John was probably in exile when he wrote this. So this was a very uplifting gospel for them. Our suffering has a purpose. We've celebrated a lot of unusual anniversaries in the last couple of months. One of them was the anniversary of Archbishop Oscar Romero's death. For those of you not familiar with Archbishop Romero, and actually I have a picture of him hanging in my office, he was a great advocate for the poor. He was a thorn in the side of the authorities. And as he was saying Mass at a convent, government soldiers came and shot him to death in the middle of Mass. Our Pope has recently recognized Archbishop Romero as a martyr. And it is thought that on his visit to South America next year, he will probably make Archbishop Romero a saint. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. February 12th was the 10th anniversary of the death of a sister named Sister Dorothy Stang. Sister Dorothy worked in Brazil. She also was an advocate for the poor. And she knew her time was coming. And as she sat in her car, watching her assassins approach her, she sat reading the Beatitudes from the Gospel. And they killed her. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. A couple weeks ago, we celebrated, or remembered, the anniversary of the march from Selma to Montgomery, where many people, knowing how dangerous it was, gathered, black and white, Jews and Catholics and Protestants, gathered together to stand up for the rights of their oppressed brothers and sisters. They marched over the Edmund Pettus Bridge and were beaten and had dogs sicked upon them. But they got what they were asking for, the right to vote. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. It is unlikely in the United States in this century that we will be asked to give our life for a cause. Although, as I was giving communion at the last Mass, there was a Eucharistic minister standing up here in tears. I wondered what was wrong, and it turns out her son is being sent to Afghanistan. So there are those of us who are going to be asked to give our lives, but for most of us that's not likely. We need to look for ways to show our solidarity with those who are suffering, with those who are willing to give their lives for justice and peace and right and faith. There are people in the Middle East dying for their faith today. Are we in solidarity with them? Are we looking for ways to solve the problems of our own community, of St. Petersburg and Pinellas County in the state of Florida in the United States? Are we willing to give of our time and talent and treasure to rectify those things, to make them better, and to be a voice of God in this country, in this city, and in this county? The Lord is calling us to that. Death is not a distraction. Death is not the end. Suffering is not a distraction. Suffering is not the end. It is part of the mission. We need to look for ways to give of ourselves, of our time, our talent, and our treasure, here at Holy Family and in our community. Because unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. But when we, as Catholic Christian people, are willing to put ourselves out there, to sacrifice, to suffer, for the sake of what is good and holy, then, when we do those things, we become the grain of wheat that sprouts up and changes the world.